Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today is actually part 2 of the Morgoth series. So, before I recap where we left off with Morgoth, I'm going to read you a quote that I think really sums up Morgoth's personality, gives some good insight into this villain we know as Morgoth. So here we go. This is Tolkien referring to Morgoth. All those of the Quendi, the elves, who came into the hands of Melkor ere Autumno was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs, in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Iluvatar. And deep in their dark hearts the orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This, it may be, was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful to Iluvatar. So there you have it. It's this taking the elves, this creation, the children of Iluvatar, this creation that Iluvatar really prized highly, and the idea of creating life, and warping it into the orcs is seen as the most hateful act of all the horrible acts that Melkor, has done, that we've talked about and will do later. This is it. This is the worst. Taking the elves and corrupting them into the orcs. Iluvatar obviously is incredibly displeased and disheartened by this act. But the orcs also hate Melkor for doing this to them. They were elves, these creatures of light, and they've been turned into these, as they put it, a mockery of elves. And that term mockery keeps coming up a lot of times when Tolkien writes about Melkor. Melkor, above all, wants to create life. He wants the ability to create life, that power, and he doesn't have it. And Tolkien many times says his one ability is to make mockeries of life, of living things, so he can twist them into these horrible shapes. You'll see him do that later with Maiar spirits that he turns into Balrogs, for instance. And so, but it's orcs in particular. Elves being warped into orcs, that is the pinnacle of his evilness. All right, so where did we leave off? We are currently in the years of the trees. We came out of the years of the lamps. The reason that there aren't lamps lighting the world anymore is because Morgoth destroyed them, because he's a jerk. We had Melkor's origin story, how he broke with the Valar. Then there was the first war. Tulkas defeats Melkor. Melkor leaves. He then sneaks back into Arda. He destroys the lamps that light Arda. The world is destroyed. Then Melkor is on Middle-earth while the rest of the Valar are hiding away on Aman. When the elves awaken on Middle-earth, Melkor's kind of the only one around, so he starts corrupting them. The Valar realize, we have to save the children of Iluvatar, and so they fight the war for the sake of elves. They capture Melkor, and they imprison him. And that's where we left off, where Melkor is in prison for thousands of years. Seems like all is well, and this is where we pick it up. So he's now been imprisoned with Mandos of the Valar for thousands of years. But they gave him a sentence. It wasn't a life sentence. It wasn't an eternal sentence. It's like basically he gets up for parole. So they said after 3 ages, which again, we're not sure what that means exactly, but thousands of years, you'll be able to come up for parole, and we can reevaluate whether you go back to prison or not. And so here is a quote dealing with this essentially parole hearing. All right. Remember too, Manve is Melkor's brother, who's also the Lord of the Valar. For it came to pass that Melkor, as the Valar had decreed, completed the term of his bondage. At length, as Manve had promised, he was brought again before the thrones of the Valar. Then he looked upon their glory and their bliss, and envy was in his heart. He looked upon the children of Ilúvatar that sat at the feet of the mighty, and hatred filled him. He looked upon the wealth of bright gems, and he lusted for them. But he hid his thoughts and postponed his vengeance. Melkor abased himself at the feet of Manve and sued for pardon, vowing that if he might be made only the least of the free people of Valinor, he would aid the Valar in all their works, and most of all in the healing of the many hurts that he had done to the world. Don't believe him. Then Manve granted him pardon. Idiot. But the Valar would not yet suffer him to depart beyond their sight and vigilance, and he was constrained to dwell within the gates of Valmar. But fair-seeming were all the words and deeds of Melkor in that time, and both the Valar and the Eldar had profit from his aid and counsel, if they sought it. And therefore, in a while, he was given leave to go freely about the land, and it seemed to Manve that the evil of Melkor was cured. Idiot. For Manve was free from evil and could not comprehend it. But Ulmo was not deceived, and Tulkas clenched his hands whenever he saw Melkor his foe go by. For if Tulkas is slow to wrath, he is slow also to forget. But they obeyed the judgment of Manve. For those who will defend authority against rebellion must not themselves rebel. Okay, so Melkor basically says, look, I turned over a new leaf. Let me heal all the hurts that I've caused everyone. He's lying, but his brother totally buys into it, and eventually Melkor gets free to wander as he pleases. It kind of reminds me a lot of what we'll see later in the Second Age, Sauron being captured by the Númenóreans. He is taken prisoner and basically talks his way into getting his own freedom and corrupting those who originally imprisoned him. We'll see that obviously Melkor has a lot of more harmful things to do, but he fooled his brother, essentially, into letting him wander freely. Now that Melkor has his freedom, he sets about to start corrupting the elves, the children of Ilúvatar. Right? We know he hates them. We just saw in that last quote how much he saw the elves hanging out with the Valar and he hated them for it. And I think he hates them again because it's a reminder that he doesn't have the power to create life. He ends up talking with the elves, in particular Feanor. So Feanor is one of the Noldor elves and is one of the most powerful elves in Tolkien's mythology. He's certainly the greatest smith of all time. He created the Silmarils, among other things, but his greatest achievement would be the 3 Silmaril gems that hold the light of the trees of the Valar. Over time, Melkor plants this seed of doubt in Feanor's mind. And that seed of doubt is that Feanor's half-brother, Fingolfin, is trying to usurp Feanor's authority. So Feanor starts creating and hoarding weapons, something that really the elves hadn't done a lot of until that point, and kind of takes on this warlike posture. And in fact, it leads to this moment when Feanor draws his sword, points it at Fingolfin's chest, and threatens to kill him. That's a huge no-no. And so the Valar basically judge Feanor and exile him to his fortress at Formenos. So they punish him. You don't draw weapons on your own kind. That's not done. Boo. So Feanor, exiled to this fortress, his father, Finve, joins him there. And so basically joins him in exile. Family. So while they're in exile, Melkor comes to Formenos again to talk to Feanor, try to manipulate him. During that conversation, it becomes apparent to Feanor. Feanor sees through Melkor's attempts. What Melkor really wants is the Silmaril gems, and those are being kept in the vaults in Formenos. So when Feanor realizes that that's Melkor's game, he basically slams the door in his face and is like, "Be gone, you!" Obviously, that enrages Melkor. He leaves, and he essentially begins plotting to destroy the trees of the Valar. So remember, the trees of the Valar, Telperion and Laurelin, are these. They light the world. They are the replacement for the lamps. The years of the lamps were now in the years of the trees. So what ends up happening is the Valar call Feanor and Fingolfin to Valinor to basically make up. Like, we want you guys to resolve your differences and shake hands, and let's patch up the ill feelings between elves. Both of the elves agree. There's this big meeting. They shake hands. Everything becomes smoothed over. But it's during that meeting that Melkor basically sneaks into Valinor with Ungoliant. Ungoliant is this mysterious spirit, very powerful, that takes the shape of a giant spider. I've done a video on Ungoliant if you want to know more about her, but just to say, her power is that she can devour light, and she uses that energy to spin webs of darkness. And so that's a very handy power when one is trying to destroy the light of the trees of the Valar. So Melkor promises Ungoliant all kinds of wealth and gems and power and that kind of stuff if she will assist him in destroying the trees. So using the darkness that she spins in her webs, they conceal themselves, they sneak in, destroy the trees. She sucks all of the light from the trees, and then they escape. And where they escape to is Formenos. Because they go to Formenos because the Silmarils are there. Also, they know that Feanor is currently back in Valinor. He's not at Formenos. The one elf at Formenos is Feanor's dad, Finvay. Finvay is killed. He's like the first one to die as Melkor just, ransacks the place with Ungoliant. And they steal all of the valuables from the vaults of Formenos. A bunch of gems, and of course, the Silmarils. They then flee to Middle-earth. I'll pick up the rest of that story in a second. Feanor blames the Valar. When he realizes his dad has been killed and the Silmarils have been taken, he blames the Valar for this. Like, you distracted me. If I had been there, I could have done something. He's not a fan of the Valar at this point. And so he also sets about an oath. It's an oath that is going to be very important for the rest of Tolkien's mythology. But he and his sons, he has 7 sons, they make an oath that basically they will hunt down the Silmarils no matter where they are. At the moment, all 3 of those Silmarils are with Melkor. But his oath is basically like, even if the Valar have the gems, we're going to go after them. If the elves have them, we're going to go after them. We swear. It's a big deal, and it's an oath that is going to cost a lot of elves' lives in the future. He also renames Melkor. It's Feanor that names him Morgoth. Morgoth means dark tyrant. And so instead of Melkor, mighty arising, he is now Morgoth, dark tyrant. So Feanor gathers the elves together the Noldor elves, and they're going to go to Middle-earth to get the gems back and deal with Morgoth. The Valar basically forbid them to go. They're going to go anyway. In the act of going, they end up there's what they call the first kinslaying. They end up killing some elves, so taking their boats, and they burn the boats, and there's a fight, and elves spill elven blood. And so as punishment for that, the Valar basically show up. As the elves are heading on toward Middle-earth, it's a little unclear if it's actually Mandos that shows up or if it's one of his messengers, but it's implied that Mandos himself, one of the Valar, shows up like wow, and gives the doom of Mandos, which basically curses the elves, the elves that follow Feanor, and basically says, "Hey, you've spilled blood. You're defying our wishes. For that, we're gonna close ourselves off to you, and good luck." And basically, and all of your attempts to get the Silmarils are going to meet with bad ends. Everything you touch is basically going to turn bad. There's actually one group of these elves led by Fingolfin who basically turn around. They're like, "Okay, we're sorry. Please forgive us, Valar," and they are forgiven. But that's a small section of this group that's following Feanor, and they are like, "We're going. We're screw you, Mandos. Head on to Middle-earth." So, back to Morgoth, who has escaped to Middle-earth with the Silmaril gems. He and Ungoliant are heading back to Angband, right? He's kind of revived Angband. Everything's good. But on the way, Ungoliant demands payment. So, Morgoth gives her gems from Formenos, but he doesn't want to give her the Silmarils. First of all, you don't want to see them destroyed, just consumed. But he's also like, "These are mine. What the hell? I'm going to put them in my crown later. You're not taking these." Ungoliant sees the Silmarils, is like, "Oh, must have." And so there's a fight. Ungoliant versus Morgoth. Now, Morgoth is also weakened from all of his efforts. He's expended a lot of energy to get to this spot. And so Ungoliant has the upper hand, big time. And probably if the fight had continued to be a one-on-one fight, Ungoliant kills Morgoth in this moment. But Morgoth shrieks in pain. And the shriek is so loud, and it goes, for miles, that the Balrogs that he has in Angband hear his cries of pain and rush forth, and with their whips they drive Ungoliant away. She flees. So Morgoth is saved by his Balrog contingent. But there's a kind of a legend that goes with that this land, Lemoth, the cries of Morgoth were so primal that if you go there and yell, you get the echo of Morgoth's cries of pain, even to this day, years and years later. So much like he scarred that land with his cries of pain. So, he survived, he has the Silmarils, he puts them in a crown. Meanwhile, the elves are on their way. They've now broken with the Valar, who are like, "Fine, you're on your own." And thus begins the Wars of Beleriand. Okay, there are basically three main Wars of Beleriand. The first one begins because Morgoth realizes, "Oh my gosh, these Noldor elves are on their way. They mean business. Let me do a preemptive strike, and I'm going to try to take out the elves that are currently in Middle-earth before the Noldor arrive to help them." So he sends two orc armies, kind of an east and west double front. And in the east, it's King Thingol. I've mentioned him. He comes into a lot of different legends. But in any case, Thingol and Denethor. This is actually the elven King Denethor, is the Denethor that the Denethor we know, Denethor the Second, Steward of Gondor, is named after this guy. So Denethor is the ruler of the Lyquendi. The Lyquendi green elves are fighting with Thingol against the orcs. Unfortunately, Denethor is killed in this battle. Thingol ends up helping to win the day, but a couple of things happen. As a result of that battle, with Denethor dying, the Lyquendi never name another king. They're like, we're done with naming rulers. They also never fight again on behalf of the elves against Morgoth. And Thingol retreats behind what they call the Girdle of Melion, his wife. And it's kind of a protective barrier, but they hide instead of fighting, essentially, from then on. So they take up a very defensive posture. Okay, in the west, it's Círdan, who is attacked by orcs. Círdan is the guy we know, obviously, from Lord of the Rings. He's the one who runs the Grey Havens. He's the shipbuilder, a very powerful elf. At one point, he's got one of the rings of power that he ends up giving to Gandalf. That guy is forced to fight against the orcs and gets defeated, basically has to retreat, and is under siege. That leads to the second Battle of Beleriand. The second Battle of Beleriand is known as Dagor Nuin Gileath, the Battle Under Stars. And this is where Feanor and the Noldor have finally arrived. And there is a massive fight. This is where the orcs that were besieging Círdan leave to go help the fight against Feanor. And so that actually helps Círdan a lot, breaks the siege. And Círdan's like, yay, we're saved. But Feanor and his elves fight against the orcs, defeat them pretty thoroughly. But as Feanor is chasing after the few remaining orcs that are retreating, he wants to kill every last one of them. He basically strays too close into enemy territory and is confronted by Balrogs. Those Balrogs seem to be always ready to, what's that? Go, go, go! So, much like they saved Morgoth from Ungoliant, they now show up to try to help out the last bit of ranks of the orcs. And so Feanor is basically outrun his coverage, and so is fighting on his own against the Balrogs. Holds his own for quite a while, but eventually is mortally wounded just in time for his sons to show up, but he dies. And so it is a defeat for Morgoth, but he takes some solace in the fact that Feanor, this enemy of his in a way, although he corrupted, manipulated him, he's still an enemy, that this hero of the elves has been killed off. And so that's the price that's paid there. Now, interestingly, right after this battle, Morgoth plays another trick. Right? He's very manipulative. So he knows that this oath has been taken by Feanor's sons. And so he offers the Silmarils, like, look, I can maybe offer you one of the Silmarils if we can do some kind of sue for peace thing. He knows that Feanor's son, Maedhros, has to at least try to get one of these Silmarils back. And so they meet under this potential truce. The forces of Morgoth meet with Maedhros. Neither one really wants to do a truce, but basically, Morgoth is using this oath against Feanor's sons. Maedhros shows up and is captured. Morgoth chains him by the wrist to Thangorodrim, the mountains that guard Angband. So he's chained by the wrist for years, hanging from the mountain, essentially, which just sounds horrible. I know, like you just, after a while, you would just get bored. Anyway. So he hangs out, literally, for years. Meanwhile, the Valar have been attempting to figure out a way to light the world again now that the trees have been destroyed. There was a point before Feanor left, they attempted to encourage him to give them the Silmarils. They could use the light from the Silmarils, which was still from those trees, to basically light the world again. And Feanor was like, nope, I'm not giving you these. You can't, if you force me, you're no better than Morgoth himself. And so they don't force him. He keeps the gems for himself. So they have to come up with a plan B. What they do is they take kind of the last bits of fruit from these trees that are now destroyed, and they use them to create the sun and the moon. And so each of those, the sun and the moon, are given a spirit to guide them. The moon is given a spirit named Tilion, and the sun is given a spirit named Arian. Arian and Tilion guide and guard the sun and the moon. And it's this creation that ends the year of the trees, right? The years of the trees. It begins the first age. The first age begins with two things. The sun and the moon are put in the sky, and humans, the age of men, men awaken for the first time. So now we're in the first age. We're past the years of the trees. I'm going to read to you a little quote here about Morgoth trying to deal with the sun and the moon now, because obviously he destroyed the light sources that were the lamps. He destroyed the light sources that were the trees. He would love to destroy the light sources that are the sun and the moon, but he is thwarted by these spirits, Tilion and Arian. So here you go. Now we're brand new in the first age. But Morgoth hated the new lights and was for a while confounded by this unlooked-for stroke of the Valar. Then he assailed Tilion, sending spirits of shadow against him, but Tilion was victorious. And Arian Morgoth feared, but dared not come nigh her, having indeed no longer the power. For as he grew in malice, and sent forth from himself the evil that he conceived in lies and creatures of wickedness, his might passed into them and was dispersed, and he himself became ever more bound to the earth, unwilling to issue from his dark strongholds. With shadows he hid himself and his servants from Arian, the glance of whose eyes they could no longer endure, and the lands near his dwelling were shrouded in fumes and great clouds. So there we go. It's interesting, not only the fact that he's unable to defeat these spirits that are guarding the sun and the moon, but that bit about how he's now dispersed himself into these creatures, when he creates the mountains and such, that he's giving a piece of himself into the land. And this actually there was a comment from, I believe the commenter was Poppin, who referred to what is known as Morgoth's Ring. Morgoth's Ring is a term used in, I think it's Tolkien's Histories of Middle-earth. And basically what that means is that, much like Sauron put himself into the ring, it's Morgoth who put himself into Middle-earth, essentially. So what we have of Middle-earth has this corrupting influence that will always be there, because Morgoth placed his actual life essence into the creatures and such of Middle-earth, and thus weakened himself. Right? So he's no longer just one powerful entity. Obviously, he's still very powerful, but he is now dispersed, as the quote says. So we're now in the first age. Men are awakening, and it's much like when the elves awakened, and the only entity there was Morgoth. We have another situation where it's Morgoth who's there to start corrupting men. Valar are back in Aman, and it's Morgoth who's corrupting humanity. So in the year 5 of the first age, remember, War of the Ring, third age, we're back in the first age, a long way before that. But in the year 5 of the First Age, Maedhros is finally rescued off of that mountain. But in order to rescue him, they have to cut his wrist, cut his hand off. It is Fingon, I believe, and also the great eagle Thorondor. And they save Maedhros minus a hand. And also Fingolfin, remember, he's the half-brother of Feanor, who is now dead. Fingolfin becomes the High King of the Noldor. And he's got a great part to play later. Probably I'll be talking about him next week. But perhaps the coolest, most cinematic moment in Tolkien lore involves Fingolfin. But, okay, so got a new king, and Maedhros has been saved, so he's back in action, and together they create a battle plan. Morgoth tries to, again, send this like preemptive strike, and this third battle goes horribly wrong for Morgoth. It's the most convincing win for the good guys that they've ever had. It's called Dagor Aglareb, the Glorious Battle. It's a complete whitewashing. Morgoth is soundly defeated, retreats back to Angband, which again is protected by those mountains, Thangorodrim. That mountain range is what saves him. They just can't pursue him, at strength, and so they have to stop and lay siege to Angband. And the Siege of Angband begins. Hundreds of years go by where Morgoth is trapped inside Angband, and the elves are encamped laying siege. And all seems well, much like when he was in prison back in the Years of the Trees. I'm sure nothing can go wrong. Here we are now in the year 60 of the First Age, and I'm sure that must be the final last we hear of Morgoth. Nothing more can go wrong. Or can it? Find out in next week's exciting conclusion to Morgoth, the Dark Lord. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye.